In the early years of World War II, a young woman finds herself swept into the devastating tide of conflict. Born into a world already fraught with economic struggle, she never imagined the kind of darkness that would soon consume her life. The war, as it did for so many others, shattered any sense of stability she once had. The innocent days of her youth were replaced by the bitter reality of survival, as her homeland fell under the oppressive grip of German occupation. Life as she knew it ceased to exist, and the horror that enveloped her turned her world into a waking nightmare. In the midst of this chaos, she was captured, torn from her home, and taken to a prisoner of war camp, where her future seemed no less bleak than the ruins around her. The camp was a desolate, dehumanizing place, a stark symbol of the cruel regime that had taken control. The barbed wire and watchtowers loomed like silent sentinels, casting a shadow over every aspect of life inside the camp. Inside, the prisoners, mostly civilians and captured soldiers, were stripped of their identities, reduced to mere numbers in the eyes of their captors. There was no room for humanity in such a place, only cold, calculating power. The guards, hardened and indifferent to the suffering of the prisoners, went about their duties with mechanical precision, showing no mercy, no pity. They reveled in their authority, wielding it like a weapon, knowing they could control life and death with a flick of their wrist or a command issued from behind their steel-lined posts. In those first days, the woman felt as though she had been thrown into a world that no longer resembled the one she had known. Her body, once strong, now ached with the shock of her capture. The days blurred together. There was no time for rest, no time for healing. Hunger was her constant companion, gnawing at her insides with each passing hour. It became harder to focus, harder to breathe through the thick fog of weakness that enveloped her. She learned quickly that survival was not just about staying alive, but about maintaining a sliver of dignity in the face of relentless dehumanization. The food rations were meager at best, often nothing more than scraps of stale bread or watery, tasteless soup. The woman, like the others, had to fight for every morsel of food. Those who were weaker, older prisoners, the sick, or the frail, were often left to go hungry, their bodies breaking down under the strain of malnutrition. There was no mercy to be found here. The guards would often take delight in watching the prisoners scramble for food, their laughter echoing through the camp like the sound of broken spirits. It was a cruel game, one that the prisoners could not win. The guards controlled everything: food, water, and even their hope. As days turned to weeks, the woman's fear deepened. The uncertainty of each day became unbearable. Would she be able to survive another day in this nightmare? Would she be able to endure the constant hunger, the crushing weight of fear, and the ever-present threat of violence from the guards? She had seen others break before her, their spirits shattered by the relentless abuse. It was only a matter of time before the same would happen to her. Every moment felt like an eternity, each one marked by the oppressive reality of her captivity. The guards seemed to enjoy making the prisoners' lives as miserable as possible. They would conduct roll calls at all hours of the day and night, forcing the prisoners to stand at attention for hours on end, regardless of the weather. In the freezing cold, they would stand motionless, shivering, their breath visible in the icy air, their bodies stiff from the lack of movement. It was an exercise in submission, a way to remind them that they were not human beings, but mere tools of war. The woman quickly learned to brace herself for these daily tortures, her body becoming a prisoner as much as her mind. In this world of brutality, every aspect of life was dictated by the whims of the guards. If they were in a particularly cruel mood, they would make the prisoners perform exhausting physical labor, often until they collapsed from exhaustion. There was no consideration for the prisoners' health, no regard for their well-being. The guards seemed to delight in pushing the prisoners to their limits, as if testing just how much suffering they could endure before they finally broke. The woman, despite her inner strength, could feel herself faltering. Every step felt like a battle, every breath a struggle against the suffocating weight of her situation. But the true horror of the camp was not just the physical suffering, it was the psychological torment. The constant fear of punishment hung over everything. The prisoners were never sure when the guards would lash out, when one of them would be chosen for a brutal beating or worse. The woman witnessed the horrific violence firsthand. She saw fellow prisoners dragged away in the dead of night, never to return. Whispers spread among the women. Some said they were taken to be executed, others that they were used as human shields in battle. The uncertainty of what awaited them in the dark corners of the camp left them all on edge, never able to fully relax, never able to fully feel safe. Despite the horrors around her, the woman clung to the memory of her home. She thought of her family, of the life she had lost, of the world that now seemed impossibly distant. She longed for the warmth of her home, the comfort of a life before the war had stolen everything from her. These memories were her only solace, a fragile thread that kept her tethered to the person she once was. Yet, even that thread seemed to be unraveling with each passing day, as the world around her grew more alien, more cruel. The moments of silence in the camp were the hardest. It was in those moments when the mind would wander, when the pain of loss and fear would become unbearable. The woman would lie on her thin straw mattress, staring up at the cold concrete ceiling, wondering if she would ever see the light of freedom again. The guards' voices echoed through the camp, their harsh commands and laughter cutting through the stillness like a blade. Sleep was a fleeting luxury, one that rarely came to the prisoners. When it did, it was broken, fitful, and filled with nightmares. As the days stretched into weeks, then months, the woman found herself struggling to hold on to her sense of identity. The war had stolen so much from her, and now it was threatening to take the very core of who she was. She had always prided herself on her resilience, on her ability to keep going in the face of adversity. But in this camp, she felt that resilience slipping away. The hunger, the exhaustion, the constant fear, all of it wore her down, piece by piece. She began to lose hope. There was no future here, no end in sight. The guards had made sure of that. They controlled the prisoners' every movement, every breath, leaving them with nothing but the empty space of their captivity. The woman had been broken before, but this time it felt different. The weight of the war, the cruelty, the constant violence, it was wearing her down in ways she couldn't yet comprehend. And in the stillness of the night, when the fear was at its peak, she wondered if she would ever find the strength to endure another day. It was a world without mercy, without hope. A world where survival meant sacrificing everything you were, everything you believed in. But as the woman lay in the cold, dark room of the camp, she still clung to a faint, almost impossible hope that one day, somehow, things would change. She didn't know how or when, but somewhere deep within her, she still believed that there was more to life than the brutal, soul-crushing existence that had become her reality. That belief, fragile as it was, kept her going even as everything else seemed to fall apart around her. The days in the camp began to stretch endlessly before her, a monotonous and unrelenting blur of hunger, despair, and exhaustion. The woman, now fully immersed in the harsh reality of life as a prisoner of war, found it harder and harder to hold onto the fragments of hope that had once kept her going. Each day felt like a repetition of the last. The same cold, the same rationed food, the same cruel guards who showed no mercy. The once brief moments of optimism that had flickered within her soul seemed to have vanished, replaced by a gnawing sense of helplessness. The camp, with its constant brutality, wore her down physically, mentally, and emotionally. In the mornings, the sound of the guards' boots echoed through the compound, signaling the beginning of another day. The prisoners, her fellow captives, slowly shuffled to their feet, their faces hollowed by hunger and fear. Some were too weak to stand, their bodies ravaged by illness and the constant malnutrition. Others had given in entirely, their spirits broken by the relentless cycle of abuse. The woman, despite the darkness that surrounded her, forced herself to stand, to face the day with whatever strength remained within her. But even she knew it wouldn't last much longer. She had seen what happened to those who were too weak to survive. They disappeared quietly in the night, never to be heard from again. The daily routine in the camp was as oppressive as the surroundings. The women were lined up each morning for a head count, a process that seemed designed to strip away any shred of dignity. Forced to stand for hours on end in the biting cold or under the scorching sun, they were subjected to the whimsy of the guards, who enjoyed toying with them as they carried out this simple task. Some prisoners would attempt to stand tall, to appear strong, but it was futile. The guards were quick to mock, to lash out at any sign of defiance or weakness. The woman learned to keep her head down, to avoid drawing attention to herself, knowing that any mistake could bring the wrath of the guards crashing down on her. Despite the suffering, there were brief moments of silence when the women could rest, if only for a few minutes. These moments were sacred, though they were few and far between. They would huddle together, sitting on the cold, unforgiving ground, eyes blank but knowing. In these quiet moments, they shared what little food they had managed to gather, passed in whispered exchanges. There was no luxury here, no comfort, but there was an unspoken bond, a shared understanding of their plight. The woman had grown used to the company of the others, but there was little emotional connection. They were all too far removed from the lives they had once known to form lasting relationships. They were survivors now, not friends. The hunger that consumed them all was perhaps the most dehumanizing aspect of their captivity. It wasn't just the gnawing pain in their bellies, but the way it twisted their minds, their desires, and their sense of self. The woman began to dream of food, simple, wholesome meals. A piece of bread, a bowl of soup, anything to fill the emptiness inside her. But the dreams were cruel, for the food was always out of reach, slipping through her fingers like sand. Her body had become accustomed to hunger, but her mind had not. Each day, she pushed herself harder, focusing on survival, keeping herself going in the face of the impossible. It was all she could do. But deep inside, she knew she was slowly withering, fading away, as the camp stripped her of everything she had once held dear. The guards, for their part, seemed to grow more callous with each passing day. They had long abandoned any pretense of civility, their actions fueled only by malice. Their cruelty had become second nature, an unthinking reflex. They would often take pleasure in tormenting the prisoners, lashing out at them for the smallest of perceived infractions. A woman who looked away for a moment too long might be slapped or kicked. A prisoner caught whispering with another might find herself dragged away, thrown into solitary confinement for hours or even days. The woman watched as her fellow captives were broken, piece by piece, their resistance drained by the constant abuse. It wasn't just the physical violence that wore them down. The mental and emotional toll was far worse. The feeling of powerlessness was suffocating, like being trapped in a world where there was no escape. Each prisoner was marked by this sense of futility, the crushing weight of hopelessness pressing down on them. There were no options, no way out. Even the thought of escape seemed laughable. The guards were everywhere, their eyes trained on every movement. The barbed wire fences and watchtowers seemed to mock them, reinforcing the notion that freedom was an illusion. The woman knew that, for now, survival was the only goal, and she clung to that, even as it seemed more and more impossible. The isolation in the camp was another suffocating force. Though the prisoners were surrounded by others, they were completely cut off from the world outside. There was no news, no word from the outside, nothing to remind them that life continued beyond the walls of the camp. It was as though they had been erased from the world entirely. The woman would sometimes wonder what had happened to her family, her friends, her life before the war. Were they still out there, trying to survive as she was? Were they thinking of her? The questions lingered unanswered, as the world outside the camp grew distant and unreachable. She tried not to think about it, but it gnawed at her, this feeling of being forgotten, of being reduced to nothing more than a prisoner, an afterthought in the grand scheme of things. Yet, amid all this suffering, the woman began to notice something that would slowly start to shift the way she saw her world. There was a small crack in the unrelenting darkness, a flicker of something different. It was a tiny thing, barely noticeable at first, but it grew with time. One of the guards, a British soldier, seemed different. Where the others were cruel, this one was quietly compassionate. He didn't take pleasure in the prisoners' suffering. He didn't lash out, didn't make a game of their misery. Instead, he would sometimes slip food to the women, a bit of bread or an extra cup of water when the others weren't looking. It was small, inconspicuous, and yet it felt like a lifeline, a sign that not all men were the same, that there was still some humanity left in the world. At first, the woman was cautious, unsure of what to make of this act of kindness. Could she trust him? Could she afford to hope? For so long, She had learned to expect nothing but cruelty from those in power. Kindness felt like a lie, like something that didn't belong in this world of suffering. But over time, as the British soldier's small acts continued, something began to shift within her. She found herself looking for him, hoping to catch a glimpse of him as he passed through the camp, wondering if today he would offer something, anything. And when he did, when his eyes met hers and he offered a small smile, something inside her stirred. It was a fragile thing, this hope, but it was enough to make her believe that perhaps, in some corner of the world, kindness could still survive. This realization, though small, was profound. It was the first sign that not everything was as it seemed. That maybe, just maybe, there was still a way out of the darkness. It didn't change everything overnight, but it planted a seed in the woman's heart, a glimmer of possibility in a world that had seemed bereft of hope. As the days wore on, she began to look for more signs of this kindness, to believe, even if just for a moment, that survival might mean more than just enduring cruelty. That the human spirit, even in its most broken state, could still be capable of something other than despair. In the days that followed, the woman's initial suspicions slowly began to give way to a cautious curiosity. The British soldier, whose small acts of kindness had begun to pierce the dark, monotonous life inside the camp, continued to appear in her periphery. At first, she thought little of it. After all, it was just another guard, another face among many, but there was something different about him. He didn't carry himself with the same disdain for the prisoners that the others did. His eyes weren't cold or indifferent. Instead, there was a warmth to them, a flicker of something that suggested he saw more than just captives behind the barbed wire. He wasn't a part of the machine of cruelty that powered the camp. He seemed to be an anomaly, a rare and fleeting deviation from the norm. The first time the woman saw him up close was during a morning roll call. The guards had ordered them to line up, their bodies stiff from hunger and exhaustion, as they endured the routine of being counted. The woman stood among the other prisoners, her eyes cast downward, her mind too weary to focus on anything but the pain gnawing at her insides. Then, as she stood there, a quiet rustling sound caught her attention. She didn't look up immediately, but the soft rustle of fabric, the sound of something shifting from one hand to another, told her that something unusual was happening. She stole a glance, barely daring to lift her eyes, and there he was. The British soldier, standing a few feet away, holding a small bundle of bread in his hands. For a moment, she thought she was imagining things. Surely, this was too much of a departure from the cruelty she had known. But as his gaze met hers, fleeting but unmistakable, she saw the quiet recognition in his eyes. There was no cruelty there, no malice. He wasn't just a guard, he was something else, something different. He had seen the hunger in their eyes, the desperation that had become so much a part of their daily existence. Without a word, he slipped a small piece of bread from the bundle and subtly placed it in her hand. It was a gesture so small, so simple, that for a moment, she didn't even know how to react. The bread, soft and slightly stale, was a gift she hadn't expected, and in its own way, it held more weight than any of the food she had been given in the camp. Her heart raced as she quickly glanced around to ensure no other guards were watching. She knew that being seen accepting food from a guard could lead to brutal consequences, punishment for the kindness that was, in their eyes, an act of defiance. But the British soldier had given her something she hadn't known she needed, a moment of human connection, a brief escape from the suffocating isolation of the camp. She held the bread in her hand, grateful but conflicted, unsure of how to feel. How could a man who was part of the system of captivity also be the source of a small, secret act of kindness? In the hours that followed, she reflected on the interaction, unsure whether to trust her instincts or to guard herself against the hope that had started to stir within her. For so long, she had been conditioned to believe that the enemy, any enemy, was just that, an enemy. There was no room for empathy in the world she inhabited, no space for compassion. Yet this man, in his quiet way, was proving that there was more to the world than the cold, unfeeling hands that held them captive. She didn't know why he was different. Perhaps it was the madness of war, the violence and suffering that had reduced everyone to mere shadows of themselves. Maybe it was his own moral conflict, his growing realization that he was not just a soldier, not just an instrument of war, but a human being with the power to choose compassion over cruelty. Whatever the reason, he had made a choice. And in doing so, he had made a choice for her as well. Over the next several days, the woman began to notice more small acts, each one further deepening the quiet bond between them. He didn't speak to her directly, didn't offer any words of comfort, but his actions spoke volumes. There were times when she was too weak to stand in the cold, when her body trembled with the weight of hunger and exhaustion. On one of those days, she found herself sinking to her knees, unable to stay upright. It was in that moment that the British soldier appeared, standing in front of her with a small, tired smile that was somehow both genuine and sad. Without a word, he offered her a tin cup filled with water. She accepted it gratefully, though the water was little more than a trickle, not enough to truly quench her thirst. But it wasn't just the water, it was the kindness that came with it. In a world where every gesture seemed designed to strip away humanity, this one had been given freely. At times, he would slip unnoticed into the barracks, leaving small portions of food behind where the prisoners could find them, simple things like a slice of bread, a hunk of cheese, or a handful of fruit. These were luxuries in the camp, though to anyone else, they might have seemed like nothing. To the woman, they were lifelines, tangible evidence that someone still saw them as human beings. It was hard for her to grasp the significance of what was happening. For so long, she had known nothing but abuse. She had come to expect cruelty, to accept it as a given, as part of the nature of war. And yet, here was a man who, in his own quiet way, was showing her that not all soldiers were her enemies. He was changing the way she thought, not just about him, but about the war itself. The woman's trust, though fragile, began to grow, and with it, the slow realization that there was still good in the world, even in the darkest corners of it. Her mind raced with the possibilities. Could he be trying to help them? Could he be a part of the resistance, secretly working to undermine the Germans from within? Was it possible that, even in the midst of this nightmare, there was a glimmer of hope? She wasn't sure. She couldn't afford to be sure. But the idea began to take root, and it was something she clung to in the long hours when despair threatened to overwhelm her. One night, as she lay on her straw mat in the barracks, unable to sleep because of the gnawing hunger in her stomach, she found herself thinking about the British soldier again. She thought about the quiet kindness in his eyes, the way he moved so carefully around the camp, as if he feared being discovered. What did he see in them, in her? Was he really trying to help? Or was this just a fleeting moment of sympathy that would eventually be forgotten in the cruel machinery of war? She had never been one to trust easily, but there was something about him that seemed genuine. She had seen the way he looked at the other prisoners, not with the disdain that most of the guards had, but with something else, something she could not yet name. Perhaps it was pity, or perhaps it was something more. Whatever it was, it gave her hope in a way she hadn't felt in months. As the days went by, the woman found herself seeking him out, hoping to catch a glimpse of him, hoping to feel the quiet reassurance that came from his small acts of kindness. It was dangerous, of course. Every glance, every exchange of food or water, could be seen by the other guards, could lead to punishment. But in a world where everything felt hopeless, where every day was just a struggle to survive, these moments of kindness had become her reason to keep going. They were proof that humanity had not entirely vanished from this place. And for the first time in a long while, she began to believe, however faintly, that she might survive this, if only because of the quiet compassion of a stranger who had dared to be different. As the days continued to pass in the grim monotony of the camp, the woman found herself slipping deeper into a strange kind of rhythm, one forged from the necessity of survival. Hunger and exhaustion were constant companions, but they had become almost secondary to the weight of the ongoing psychological struggle. Every day felt the same, repeated cycles of cruelty, enforced labor, and the crushing monotony of waiting for the next moment of suffering. Yet, in the middle of it all, something had shifted inside her. The quiet acts of kindness from the British soldier had begun to take root in her heart, slowly eroding the fortress of numbness she had built around herself. She didn't know how or why, but it was as if his small gestures of humanity were slowly offering her a path out of the suffocating despair that had consumed her for so long. One morning, as the prisoners were being herded out for their daily roll call, something unexpected happened. The usual routine was interrupted by a sudden change in the camp's atmosphere. The guards, who were normally loud and barking in their orders, seemed unusually tense. There was a heightened sense of urgency in the air, and the woman couldn't help but feel a ripple of anxiety run through her. Something was wrong. She could feel it in the way the guards moved, in the way the prisoners looked at each other with suspicion and fear. The usual calm of the camp had been replaced by an undercurrent of tension. The British soldier, however, was still there, though now his actions seemed more deliberate, more cautious. She watched him closely, a mixture of curiosity and concern rising in her chest. The woman's thoughts raced. Had he been found out? Was he being watched more closely now? The idea that he might be discovered, that his small acts of kindness could cost him everything, gnawed at her. She had seen the way the guards had reacted when they found out about any form of defiance, punishment, violence, even death. The thought of him being caught terrified her, but the truth was that she didn't know what she felt for him. It wasn't just gratitude. It was something deeper, something more complicated, an emotion she hadn't allowed herself to feel in a long time. The seeds of a connection that had started to grow in the midst of all the destruction. Days went by, and the tension in the camp only increased. Whispers passed between prisoners, murmurs about a possible escape attempt, about a chance for freedom. There were rumors that the Allies were getting closer, that the war was nearing its end. The woman couldn't afford to believe in such things, not fully. The camp was a place where hope was a dangerous illusion, a fleeting thing that could only lead to disappointment. And yet, something had shifted in her mind. The small kindnesses from the British soldier had changed her perspective. She couldn't just ignore them, couldn't dismiss them as an anomaly anymore. They had become something that held the possibility of change, something that could break through the monotony of survival and offer something more. One evening, as the prisoners were returned to their barracks after a particularly grueling day of forced labor, the woman found herself waiting by the door, her heart pounding. She had seen the British soldier pass by earlier, his eyes meeting hers briefly in a silent exchange. She didn't know why she was waiting, but there was a pull she couldn't ignore. The moment she had been waiting for came quietly, almost imperceptibly. The British soldier slipped into the barracks as he had done before, but this time, something was different. He seemed more purposeful, his steps more confident. He walked toward her, and for the first time, he spoke directly to her. His voice was low, almost a whisper, but it held a sense of urgency that made her heart race. He told her that there was a plan, a way out, a chance for escape. It was risky, of course. Everything was risky in this world, but this time, there was a glimmer of real hope in his eyes. He told her that the prisoners had an opportunity to escape under the cover of darkness, that a small group had managed to break free, and that she could be part of it. Her mind spun with disbelief and hope all at once. The word itself felt surreal, a dream that was so far removed from her reality that it seemed impossible. And yet, here he was, offering it to her. Her immediate instinct was to reject the idea. She had seen escape attempts fail before. Too many had been caught and punished. The cost was often far greater than any hope of freedom. But as she looked into the soldier's eyes, she saw something she had never seen before, a quiet desperation. He wasn't offering this out of duty or obligation. He was offering it because he believed it was the only way to save them, to save all of them. The weight of his sincerity hit her like a wave. In that moment, she knew that this wasn't just another fleeting act of kindness. This was a man willing to risk everything to give them a chance to survive, to escape the clutches of war, to reclaim their humanity. The woman hesitated, her mind racing with conflicting emotions. Could she trust him? Was this a trap? But as her gaze lingered on the British soldier, she found herself nodding, a sense of determination welling up within her. She had endured the camp for so long, had seen so many others lose hope, had watched the cruelty of the guards drain the life from so many. She couldn't go on like this, couldn't continue to live in a world where cruelty reigned. The idea of escape was the first real spark of hope she had felt in months, perhaps in years. She had to take the chance, even if it meant risking everything. The soldier's expression softened, and for a moment, there was something unspoken between them, a shared understanding. He didn't need to say more. His trust in her was clear, and in that moment, she knew that they were no longer just two strangers, prisoner and guard. They had become something more, something connected by the fragile thread of humanity that still lingered between them, despite the horrors of war. The woman spent the next few days in a state of quiet anticipation, waiting for the moment when she would be called to act. The tension in the camp was palpable, the uncertainty of the situation weighing on her shoulders. She didn't sleep well, her mind racing with thoughts of what could go wrong. The fear of being caught haunted her, but it was overshadowed by the yearning for something better. The possibility of escape was too great to ignore. When the night finally came, the darkness of the camp seemed to close in around her. The guards were more lax, distracted by their own internal struggles, and the woman, along with a small group of other prisoners, slipped into the shadows, guided by the British soldiers' quiet instructions. The escape was nothing like she had imagined it would be. There were no grand, cinematic moments of triumph. Instead, it was a slow, cautious movement, a series of small steps taken in fear and hope. They moved through the camp as silently as they could, slipping past the guards, avoiding the spotlight of the searchlights that swept across the compound. Every sound seemed amplified, every footstep a potential death sentence. But they made it. They reached the outer perimeter of the camp, where the wire and the watchtowers seemed to loom larger, more insurmountable than ever. It was then that the woman understood the true cost of freedom. It wasn't just the physical escape, it was the emotional and psychological toll it took to step away from everything she had known, to step into the unknown, to risk everything on a hope. But in that moment, as she climbed over the barbed wire and felt the cold night air on her face, she realized that it was worth it. The escape, though uncertain and fraught with danger, was her chance to reclaim her life, to break free from the endless cycle of suffering. And as they crossed the threshold, into the unknown world beyond the camp, she knew that the British soldier had given her something more than just the possibility of survival. He had given her the opportunity to hope again, to believe that, even in the darkest of times, there could still be kindness, still be a path out of the despair. And for that she would never forget him. The days following their escape were a blur of fear and exhilaration. The woman, now free from the iron grip of the camp, felt the weight of both relief and uncertainty pressing heavily upon her. She had crossed over from the world she had known for so long into an unknown wilderness, a world where every step forward felt like a gamble. The first few hours had been spent in a dazed fog of disbelief, her mind struggling to comprehend the reality of what she had done. She had escaped the camp, but the escape itself had not been the end. It had been a beginning that was as terrifying as it was promising. She had not expected freedom to be easy. Nothing in her life had been easy since the war had come to her door, since her world had been shattered and turned into a nightmare. Yet, there was something almost surreal about the moment of leaving the barbed wire fences behind, about stepping into a world that was no longer controlled by the harsh dictates of their captors. She could still feel the cold of the night air against her skin, the wetness of the grass beneath her feet as she moved cautiously, trying to stay hidden, to stay alive. But even in the midst of this disorienting experience, she could feel the stirrings of something deep within her, hope. It had been so long since she had allowed herself to hope, since she had dared to believe that there could be a future beyond the camp. For so long, she had only lived for survival, her days measured by the small victories of making it through another moment of suffering. The British soldier, with his quiet acts of kindness, had given her a glimpse of something else, a glimpse of humanity, of something worth living for. And now, as she moved further from the camp, her heart pounded with the realization that she might, for the first time in what felt like an eternity, have a future. The escape itself had been a chaotic blur, a desperate scramble to move through the shadows and avoid detection. They had passed through the camp's perimeter under the cover of darkness, their hearts pounding in their chests, their minds racing with the thought of being caught at any moment. But the escape had been carefully planned. The British soldier had guided them, leading them with quiet authority and a calm demeanor that had been a lifeline in the chaos. His presence had been a constant source of reassurance. He moved with a quiet purpose, his every action measured and deliberate. It was clear that he knew the risks, knew the consequences of being caught. He had already made the decision to help them, even though it had put him in grave danger. For the woman, there had been no choice but to trust him. The trust she had placed in him wasn't born of naivety but from the quiet bond that had formed between them over the past weeks. She had seen his humanity, his willingness to risk everything for the sake of others. In a world that had stripped away her faith in human decency, he had been a rare spark of light.